Okay, so welcome to our exhibition Rooted here at the Dovecote Centre. It's an exhibition that I've curated, and we've produced this project in partnership with the Northumberland Coast National Landscape. So we're going to be doing a short curator's tour today for those of you that couldn't make it to the exhibition in person, or that made it to the exhibition in person but might want to know some of the stories and thinking behind the works that we've got on display. So the first piece, as you come into the exhibition, is actually a poem, and that's been written by our writer-in-residence, Ali Rowland. And Ali's been involved from the beginning and the outset of the project, and she's had a chance to see some of the works as I was picking them out and selecting them. She's met some of the artists, she's been in talking to visitors, and she's actually been producing a poem for every piece in the exhibition. And thanks to the funding that we've had from the Northumberland Coast National Landscape, we're actually going to be able to produce a small booklet, which we're going to hope to make available in the near future. So the first piece that we've got here is actually by Donnelly. Jim's behind the camera filming me today, and some of you might recognise this as being a slightly different version of the photograph that he had in the Woodhorn Open exhibition at the start of the year that he received the overall prize for. And what I really like about this piece, and that spoke to the theme, was the sort of stark, dramatic quality that you've got. It's quite severely cropped in that it's got a very large expansive sky and a very low horizon, but you still get that sense of distance in the image. And of course there's the whole loaded quality that the flooding in the image brings, you know, thinking about things like the climate crisis, but how that presents itself at a very local level. You know, rising sea levels and things of that nature can be quite hard to encapsulate into our lives when you see people in far-flung corners of the world, but it actually is a phenomenon that presents itself in very local ways, which is something that we've tried to pick up on in the exhibition. So following on from Jim's photograph, we've actually got a pair of pieces, a painting by Ted Taylor and a photograph by Ian Bolton, both of Linemouth Power Station. Now, these are quite loaded images, and one of the things that we've been thinking about is the context of Northumberland being a tourist county, but parts of the county that, like Linemouth, are not included on tourist brochures, the parts of the county that get ignored. And we really wanted to put these front and centre to challenge these preconceptions about the images of the county that get pushed around a lot. And this piece by Ted shows it looking south, so looking south along the coastline from near Cresswell towards Linemouth. That's the title of the piece. And there's a lovely heart just hanging over the power station in the distance there. And what I really enjoy about this piece is, I think what Ted captures really well is the sheer variety of colour that you get in grey. So it might look grey on the camera, but actually in person he's picked up all these lovely purples and blues, greens and yellows that come together to make a very nice chromatic grey. So I really enjoy that piece, and I enjoy the sort of sweep of the coastline that you get in Northumberland, a place with very big skies and low horizons. And then contrasted, perhaps you could see this as a scenic image compared to Ian's photograph, which shows a very stark, quite shocking side to this area of the coastline. And it's a piece that's provoked a lot of conversations in this exhibition. So it actually shows the site where a lot of rubbish, there's buildings that form part of the power station complex, and industrial buildings were actually demolished, and they were bulldozed, and that rubbish has now it's been eroded away over time, and that rubbish is now going back into the sea. And the week of recording this, Northumberland County Council have just started to actually make repairs to that land to start to dig that back out. So it's a very stark image. And it really is, it's provoked a lot of conversations with visitors to the exhibition, and I think the scale of the image as well really makes it jump out in the exhibition, and it shows a side that we would probably all rather not confront, but I think, and it's the nature of Ian's practice, that he does like to challenge people with these kinds of very provocative images. But I think the two of the works go together really well, and they show the sort of different sides to our coastline. Okay, so next in our lineup we've got a pair of pieces that I think really brilliantly capture the cold light that you find on the Northumberland coast, and these are pieces by Catherine Renton and William Hurd. Catherine is an artist. She's from Amble. She was born in the area, and she's lived in the town for a long time. Now she lives just outside of it. But this is another piece that is linked with Woodhorn. She received a highly commended prize at the recent Woodhorn Open for a piece from the same series. And this piece is titled Beadnell Car Park All Day, £8.50. And she does have a slightly humorous tone when she's titling these pieces, because these pieces hint at, again, this idea of Northumberland as a tourist county. So a lot of Catherine's work in the past has been involved with the castles. A lot of people will know her sandcastle work, paintings of the defensive structures that line our coastline. And they sort of hint at the Northumbrians as a border people and those kinds of ideas. But actually what she's hinting at with these pieces is it's a bit of a commentary on how people from the area are sort of reassessing their place within the county, of that sense of being priced out of the county. And she sort of explained that the popularity of places like Beadnell is that she couldn't take her kids to the beach now as she did when she was growing up because of the cost of parking, and this idea of locals in an area being priced out of it in more ways than just housing. So she's produced this beautiful oil painting. It's an oil painting on board, and it's quite thick in places, but she's really captured all of the different colours that you find in tarmac. I think people, quite a bit like Ted's painting and the sky, she's really captured all the different colours that you can find in tarmac. And it's that idea of sort of reassessing the everyday. I think she's done a really brilliant job of elevating something that most people would just go straight past, that most people wouldn't give a second glance to. She's put that front and centre in a painting, and she's presenting it to us, the viewer, and really making us take note of things that we wouldn't otherwise see in the landscape. And this piece by Bill, I think they hang really well together and complement each other because they've got this beautiful, cool quality to them. And this piece by Bill is Lindisfarne Causeway. It's quite a well-known area, and it's sparked a lot of comments about cars being stuck on the causeway and things like that. And it does have the pair of them do have almost cinematic qualities, the way that they're framed and the 4:3 format. But what Bill's done with this piece, and you probably won't be able to see it in the video, but it's actually composed of a lot of very subtle lines that build up the picture. And there's actually also a very fine grid on it. And what Bill's interested in this piece, based on some of the conversation that I've had with him, is sort of that idea of applying abstract painting techniques from people like Agnes Martin, the American painter, who produced very subtle grid-like paintings, applying those kinds of techniques to something very representational. So there are solid areas of colour, like in the dunes here, but he's also allowed these sort of flickers of the striations in the paint to come through and sort of break up the refuge box, and then it's contrasted with more solid areas of colour, like in the sign here. And it really has a beautiful quality to the paint that when you stand back it makes a beautiful chromatic sort of grey, but then when you get up close it all breaks down. You can see all these beautiful colours sort of flickering under the paint on top, and I think it's a really lovely piece. The pair of them really capture aspects of the coastline that might get otherwise overlooked. Road signs and parking tolls and things like that. Things that we would otherwise not notice are put front and centre in these artworks. So next up we've got this, it's actually a piece of textile work by Liz Lloyd, who's based up in Wooler. And I really enjoy this piece because when I was conversing with Liz as I was pulling the show together, we were discussing how these works come about, and Liz and her husband Jonathan Lloyd, who has also got a piece in the show, they're quite keen walkers, and they'd been on a walking holiday in the Pennines, and that's something that sparked this piece. And it might not have an immediate visual link, but as soon as she explained that to me, I sort of got the sense of the work being, almost like the strata in rock. And it's a beautiful piece because it again, and it's a recurrent thing, is that when you come up close to it, you realise just how much colour is actually there in the weaving, and it's a lovely blue threads flickering through the weaving that she's done, and you get these fantastic forms that are generated that Jonathan was explaining when he dropped the piece off, are actually held there by the pressure of the glass on the textile piece, so it's pinned in the corners, and these forms that are made, again, they do hint at this kind of, it's almost like a cross section of the Pennines, almost of the rocks and the peat, all layered with these sort of organic, sort of almost moss growing through it, and I also enjoy the way that I think it's Jonathan that's framed this, has left this OSB in the background, because it brings the texture of the weaving up really nicely. And I think it's a beautiful piece, the way that it's suspended in the frame with this nice uneven sweep at the bottom, and it's a really beautiful piece that again has sort of sparked some conversations. Now I was very keen not to have this, maybe because I'm a painter myself, I didn't want this to just be a painting show. I wanted to include different pieces of photographs, textile work, slightly more sculptural pieces, drawings, so it wasn't just a painting show, but that had things that might have painterly techniques, going back to the idea of layering, but that all link back to this idea of a rootedness in the landscape. That's something that I think this piece really has. So we're here with a drawing by Kevin Parker, and again, this piece has been quite evocative, and it's sparked a lot of questions about what it actually depicts, what it's made up of. And this piece, as Kevin explained, it's got a very long title, which is South Beach Blythe, 55.1125 degrees north, 1.4994 degrees west, 11:46 a.m. On the 23rd of October 2021. So it's a very long title, but that title links back to the origin of what's actually causing that drawing, and that's sand. So this piece actually comes out of a body of research by Kevin, where he's been collecting he's been collecting sand from a point on the beach, which is where the swash meets the backwash. And that's a point where sand is getting deposited by the waves coming in and meeting the waves going out. So it's a sort of bimodal position on the shore. And sand gets deposited, and sand of different grain sizes. So Kevin's been collecting work from collecting sand from these locations and producing work out of it. And what he's been doing is he's taking cartridge paper and he's applied some fixative to the back, and he's put this sand on the paper and then made what is in effect a kind of like a coin rubbing, which reveals the different size grains of sand that you would find at this point on the beach. And when you get a few of these works together, it sort of hints at all the subtle differences between different points on the beach in different taken from significant areas from Kevin's life, different beaches that he likes to visit. And so it's just a different way of making a drawing, but it's a really interesting piece, and I think it's quite small, so we come in quite close to it, but it holds its own. It's got a very interesting kind of quite almost calming presence about it. It really encourages that sort of idea of slow looking, of really paying attention to the work and really sort of work that demands a lot of you. It demands quite a lot of attention, but it is quite rewarding. The more you look at it, you notice all the subtle differentiations between all the different layers of charcoal that Kevin's drawn on. So we're here with another pair of pieces on this wall, and all the pieces along this wall hang quite well together because they've all got a sort of an earthy, monochromatic sort of palette in them. But we've got a mixed media piece here by Kitty Jones, and Kitty's an SWLA, which means she is a member of the Society of Wildlife Artists, and she's actually one of 2 SWLA members that we've got in the exhibition along with Paul Henry. So this piece depicts some cliffs near St Abbs up the coastline, and I think it's a fantastic piece which is full of the sort of frenetic energy that you find on the coastline, where there's seabirds flying in all directions, you're looking down, there's waves crashing. It's got a brilliant sense of energy to it, and I think that comes from Kitty's use of line. She's got a brilliant line in her work that is packed full of energy, and if you were to look up close to this, the birds are all just defined with very quick, almost calligraphic lines made with charcoal and crayon and ink, and she makes these drawings on site generally, and I just think it's a brilliant piece that gives a sense of the sort of the frenetic quality of the coastline. It's sort of at this time of year, and I think it's got a brilliant composition. That I enjoy the way that your eye sort of tumbles down the picture from these cliffs up at the top. They sort of come down and it comes in. The more you look at it, you get a sense of how the land slots together in all these different cracks and crevices, tumbling right down to the shore at the bottom there. I think it's a really great piece. And then next to it, we've got this piece, which is a sculptural piece by Claire Ward. And Claire's based up just past Wooler. And I think it's this piece, perhaps because it's just so different to everything else in the exhibition, has probably sparked the most conversations. But I think that it's the ambiguous quality of the piece that has made it so evocative. And what I mean by that is that it reminds us of a lot of different things, and it's almost like tree rings. It's like a tree stump, or it looks maybe like a wasp's nest, that sort of layered quality, or it's very evocative of a lot of different natural things, bodily things, but it just slightly eludes comparison to anything. What it actually is made up of is a tyre. The central part of the piece is a tyre that Claire found on the beach, to which she has glued on lots of different pieces of recycled textiles. And it goes back to that idea of layering, slightly like in Liz's piece, and that idea of layers and strata. As Claire is very, very interested in the notion of layers and layering, things being built up, our lives being made up of layers, of the modern world being made up of layers of communication, of the natural world being made up of layers. She's really keen to put this idea of layering forthright in her pieces. And I just think it's a brilliant piece because of just the number of conversations that it sparked. And it is, I think that is why it's so interesting, is because it just eludes comparison to anything. It's got a sort of, it's almost like a sort of a body. It's good. I feel it's a very bodily piece. It's very hard to put into words what it's evocative of, but it just relates to a lot of different natural forms. So next up, we've got a piece by Gillian Lee Smith, another Woodhorn prize winner. Gillian got first prize for this at Woodhorn a couple of years ago. And it's titled Roots Break Rock, Quarry Trees at Belsay. And it's a lovely, again, like Kitty's, it's a mixed media piece. So, and I believe, based on conversations with Gillian, that I think it's on an oil paper, and she said that it's got a nice quality, or soil paper, where it sort of slightly resists water-based media, which this is made up of, with sort of layers of acrylic ink, and it's sort of treads that fine line between a drawing and a painting, a bit like Kitty's. But I think when I was thinking about which piece of Gillian's I would select out, I really had this piece in mind. Given the title of the exhibition, Rooted, I thought we had to have something that put roots front and centre, which I think this piece does quite obviously. But Gillian works from a lot of sketches. She goes out into the field gathering them. She produces very intricate accordion sketchbooks. She goes out sketching a lot, sketching at Belsay, and it's got this beautiful quality where the more you look at it, the more it's like looking through something. So there's pieces painted on here which are in acrylic, which gives it quite a flat texture, but then there's areas that whilst it's still been wet, she has sort of drawn in with the end of a brush. It's quite interesting. The more you look at it, the more you can pick out the different layers, and there's sort of the runs of the sort of brown ink there, and it just sort of, it's this, I think she's very interested in her work, and again, like Claire, layering and things being covered up and uncovered, a sort of almost a kind of archaeological sort of process in the work. And there's these beautiful areas where the paint is sort of pooled as it's dried, and it has a lot of different consistencies of paint that are all put next to each other. Very thin areas of paint applied next to quite thick impasto paint. And then next to it, we've actually got my piece. So this piece is done out on location near Morwick. So it's just down in the river valley. And it was done at roughly about this time last year. And it's that point in the spring where everything is growing, where there's just chaos out in the landscape because things are springing up left, right and centre. And what I found interesting about this is the way that when you try and paint something like that, it's pure green, but it's actually many different shades of green the more you look at it. But when you try and paint it, it breaks down into something that becomes sort of almost abstract. It becomes a sort of field of different marks. I was thinking about the main sort of focus of the piece was this branch that was quite in shadow, and then you had the light on this meadow in the middle of the picture, and I was quite interested in I'm interested in negative space a lot, and this idea of sort of making the space around something almost as solid as the thing itself. So I'm quite interested in the landscape down at Morwick because there's a lot of these sort of little pockets and sort of tunnels through the trees, and it's somewhere that I've been spending a lot of time lately, and still do. Like I say, it's from May last year. So yeah. And so next to mine is a piece by a Berwick artist, Anna Chapman Parker. And these pieces by Anna, the title is Shift Register brackets ED Blue Verdita. I hope I've pronounced that right. But these pieces are really interesting, again linking back to an idea about negative space. And Anna produces these works from drawings that she does, very delicate observational drawings when she's going out. A lot of her practice focuses on overlooked plants, weeds that she finds out in the streets, in gardens, in parks and fields, plants that again, she's very keen to reclaim the idea of weeds as a positive thing. She's very in favour of rewilding and things like that. And what I find that her work has done for me is it really makes you notice things that you wouldn't otherwise notice, plants that you would ordinarily overlook. And what's really interesting is how she's layered things in this piece, how she has, and I don't know if you can notice, but there's actually areas that repeat across the picture. So that is the same as that, and then there's these sort of they almost resolve into words, because there's actually an Emily Dickinson poem that she's written out and then used to make a painting from. So you've got the words, you've got the forms of these plants layered over them. She was explaining that some of these quite sharp lines that run across it are actually the lines of an envelope, because Emily Dickinson used to write poems on envelopes, and that's something that I know a lot of artists do. If you haven't got your sketchbook to hand, you just draw on scrap bits of paper, and then you get a sense of, I think this is almost a piece of tape, and then there are sort of these fine lines running through the piece, and I think they've got that sense of how rewarding it is to give something consistent, sustained attention. If you really give a piece of work attention, you get a lot out of it, a bit like Kevin's piece. And the more you look at this piece, the more you notice all these subtle visual elements and visual clues, and just how she's composed all of these very intricate forms. By not painting the form, she's painted the form around them. She's given presence to what's not there. She's given presence to the space around things. And they have been very beautifully painted. It's oil on linen. And I think they complement each other beautifully, almost as a single work. And then hanging next to it is we've got this piece by Jeff Bradford. And Jeff, this piece is actually all made out of recycled materials that he's found on the Northumberland coast between Lindisfarne and Allenmouth. I think he even said that the frame is made out of a pallet. So Jeff comes from a kind of a British modernist tradition. It links back to sort of artists like Ben Nicholson, and what he's done is he's taken all these different elements. It could almost be a door frame there, pieces of wood that have been washed up on the beach, and he puts them into these constructions. And quite like Claire's, I think what's really interesting is the piece almost resolves into something, but not quite. People have come in and commented that you can almost see a boat, the form of a boat, or it's almost like waves, but it is of itself. It is a non-objective piece of work. It's pretty much an abstract piece of work. That's quite a loaded term. But I think it's really beautiful the way that he's contrasted all the different surfaces off of one another, so that you've got the tan of that piece of wood, you've got the beautiful blues, and all these colours, Jeff says, are natural colours. He hasn't painted any of this. They are the colours that were on the material when he found it. They might have been polished and sanded a little bit and revealed other colours, but they are pretty much all the colours that were there. And you do notice there's these beautiful little flickers of things behind objects. So this piece here, there's a beautiful hit of yellow behind it, and you've got these sort of metal forms there. And I think you get that really strong sense of materiality in Jeff's work, of the materials being what's really important in the work, not images, not anything else, just the materials being the subject of the work, and really encouraging you to get something out of that. So here we've got a piece by Paul Henry, SWLA, as I mentioned before when I was talking about kitties. Paul's a member of the Society of Wildlife Artists, and we've got a beautiful piece that it really glows off of these this sort of mid-tone of our exhibition walls, and it's a piece of its colour nose point just up the coast past Howick. And they're not seagulls, as he would correct me. They are fulmars nesting, and it's titled Cliffhanger. And I think it's a really quite dramatic piece by Paul. And it's because of the quite sharp composition of this. It's quite severe in those sort of very stark shadows, and the sort of the black veins running through the rocks, but also in that sort of light hitting the rocks, that evening light just as the sun's dipping in the sky. And I think it's a really very evocative piece, and it's actually an oil painting. It looks almost like a watercolour, and that's because it's a paint that he's really thinned down with solvent, and he's allowed it to pool and run in places. And you can see here that he's actually tipped the board on its end, and the paint is run, and it's lifted bits of the paint that sort of sat pooled and made these very almost like sand on the beach in runnels. it reveals all these different forms, and that's something he was very interested in when he was exploring this technique of allowing the paint to sort of do its own thing and not try and control it too much. But of affording that to, rather than using watercolour, affording that to a medium like oil, which is typically given a bit more precedent in English painting. And I think it's really lovely the way that he's modelled the rocks, using this really strong shadow, the way that he's modelled the birds and the rocks, and he's kept, you can actually, this is the white of the board. It's a piece of mount board that he's primed a couple of times to be a very high white, and you can see that he's actually left the mount board unpainted on the crisp whites of the birds' breasts and heads, and then the other areas he's put. I think that's why the orange really glows, is because it's painted over like a watercolour, painted over very thinly, allowing the high white of the gesso to really shine through. And I think it's a really interesting piece by Paul. And then next to it, we've got this piece by Sarah Bradford, the second of Jeff's wife, the second of the couples that we've got in the exhibition, and this is a beautiful piece that links with Sarah's sort of interest in paint, in letting paint do what it wants, slightly like Paul, and letting paint, and like Jeff, the materials really lead the process. And the more you look at this piece, the more you notice, the more colour you notice buried under there. And again, slightly like Gillian, there are common threads that run through the exhibition, slightly like Gillian, this idea of burying and excavating in painting, of applying paint and removing it. You can see where she's really rubbed down certain areas and scrubbed things with brushes and rags and palette knives, and then areas that have been applied back on to sort of build up these different facets of colour. And I think what Sarah was really interested in this piece, and it hangs opposite Ted's painting in the exhibition, is she was interested in the colours that you find in the grey har of the Northumberland coast. She was interested in making a painting out of all those subtle colours that you find in that flat grey. It's actually not flat at all. That when you really look at it and give it attention, you notice all these subtle colours in it. And Sarah has produced, like Jeff, she comes from a modernist British tradition. She's interested in painters like Peter Lanyon and Gillian Ayres and these kinds of British abstract painters. But you get the sense that it's very rooted in although it might not be an objective view of the landscape, a scene, it gives a sense of the colours in the landscape, the forms, almost applying natural processes, almost like it's sort of been weathered, repeating the sort of recycling processes back onto the painting, of scrubbing things down as you might find out in the landscape. So here we've got a pair of pieces by Matilda Bevan. Now Matilda is she's based just outside of Hexham. She recently had an exhibition at the Granary Gallery up at Berwick, which was it sort of drew on the work of a early 20th century British artist, Thomas Hennell, and she developed an interest in farming as a result of looking at Hennell's work and responding to his work. And when I sent a brief round to the artists that I wanted to put in the show, and gave them the sort of focus of it was, we were building an exhibition about the landscape and about how, as artists, we deal with the environment, what's our relationship to it, how is it utilised. And Matilda actually produced these works specifically for the exhibition. So she was interested in a programme that the Northumberland Coast National Landscape is involved in, which is the Farming in Protected Landscapes programme. And she visited one of the farms that the Northumberland Coast National Landscape work with up at Amble Farms, and she took some images. Now, I don't know how well it shows up on camera because these are very, very subtle images, but it actually depicts somebody planting hedges. There's a gentleman there, a spade, a fence, and you can see somebody, a sort of stooped figure there. And they're painted, they're oil on board on wooden panels. And they've got this very bright sort of magenta colour painted, this sort of cerise painted underneath. And then when she came to deliver the pieces, she was explaining that she had painted that on and was trying to develop this image. And she wanted to cover the image again. This idea, as I've spoken about in Gillian's and then Sarah's, of this excavating and uncovering. She painted it on in a sort of slightly dull, almost Indian red, a kind of muddy colour, and covered the image up, and then was lifting bits out with the brush. And quite a number of people have come in and sort of almost not walked past the pieces, but have not necessarily noticed what's there. They thought they were these sort of just reddish abstract paintings. And the more, again, this idea of giving the work attention, the more they've looked at it, the more it's sort of revealed as the eye adjusts. I find them really interesting because it's almost like being out in low light conditions, like late in the evening, or that sort of when you've just turned the light off at night and your eyes are adjusting. They're a really interesting pair of pieces, and you notice all these sort of subtle shapes in the sky. And I know she's very grateful to Guy up at Amble Farms for permitting her access. And again, showing a different side of the landscape, and the work that they're doing, planting hedges in context of carbon capture and things like that. And then next to it, we've got this piece by Jonathan Lloyd. And in this piece here, it actually depicts Berwick train station. As I was sort of messaging Jonathan and we were discussing what piece of work he would put in, he was explaining, and Jonathan is quite a keen cyclist, and he's done things like he cycled to Italy to visit Giotto's frescoes and things like that, and these quite monumental journeys to far-flung places. But he was explaining that he started to produce work that's closer to home. And Berwick train station, as he mentioned in an Instagram post, it's where he sees his kids off, and when they come back, it's got that link with home. And a bit like Catherine's piece, a car park, it's a transient kind of liminal space. The tourists visiting our county, it's the first thing that they see when they make a trip here. And it's a really beautifully painted. It's very heavily done. I think he actually cut part of the picture off when he was working on it. Quite dramatic edits to it. But it's been painted oil on plywood, very heavily painted in. I don't quite know if it's still dry yet, but it's been painted in these very thick passages, and you can see where he's used almost a very stiff brush to mark in these quite solid blocks of colour. And I know Jonathan comes from, he's quite interested in the work of people like David Bomberg, that kind of tradition of English painting. And I think it's a great painting with real presence, and sort of, it's a very gutsy painting, as I think Jonathan would probably say, quite brutish. But then you have sort of delicate things like this. It's just these flickers of light, almost like the sun going down, sort of reflecting on these windows. But it sort of puts the paint front and centre in the image, and you can't really look at one of Jonathan's painting without being aware of the materials. You know, like Jeff, like Sarah, of the materials being really front and centre. And lastly here is a piece by Neville Wilson. So Neville wouldn't describe himself as an artist. Neville prefers the term visual communicator. And he's very interested in sort of systems of communication through images. And it's sort of slightly atypical of Neville's work, because this piece is so colourful. I think anybody that knows Neville's work will sort of remember it for the very monochromatic, typically photo etchings. But this piece is actually, it's a digital scan. And what it's actually composed of, and there's always a double entendre with Neville's work, is that it's titled A Load of Balls. So it's actually dog balls, foam dog balls collected off the beach. Neville's a very avid beachcomber, and what he's done is he's collected these over a number of months and years, and he's actually arranged them on a scan bed, very high quality scanner, and he's arranged them. Doesn't know what the image is going to look like, but he's arranged them to create this sort of abstracted pattern that, when seen from a distance, it gives this beautiful array of different colours and forms, and all this fine sort of dust is grains of sand. So when you come up close, you'll notice that you can make out every grain of sand that's fallen off the dog balls as he's been arranging them in crisp detail. I think he said that he could have this image blown up to about 18 foot if he wanted to, because it's such a high quality scan. But you can see, magnified on this sort of scale, they take on an appearance a bit like Claire's work. There's a sort of a natural and man-made ambiguity. They look almost like coral or rocks when seen up close, but obviously this kind of image, it's a very beautiful image. I think some of the brilliant, I love these neon colours that it's picked up with the neon orange, but it's obviously got that association with plastic pollution, something so prevalent in the news cycle, and things that organisations like the National Landscape are trying to mitigate against, beach cleans and things. And Neville actually says that it's getting harder and harder to make work like this, that he's collecting plastic things off of the beach. It's actually getting harder to make this kind of work because there isn't as much litter around, which is maybe a positive, quite a positive thing, maybe not in Neville's case, but like I say, it's a really interesting image that has sparked a lot of conversations, and it shows that sort of line between seeing something up close and seeing it from a distance. So from a distance, it does make this beautifully abstracted image, and then up close, it reveals the extent of all these very fine grains of sand, sort of almost like a mist, as if they're sort of tumbling down the picture, and then bits of grass tied in and things like that. But what Neville was explaining was that, like I say, he doesn't know what it's going to look like until he actually runs it through the scan bed. When it's scanned, he'll see the image, but it's not until he's done that he knows how it's going to look. He's got a rough idea. And in that respect, it's almost like printmaking. So in printmaking, you don't really know what it looks like until you've run it through the press and you've pulled the paper off, at least things like dry point etching. You don't know what it looks like until you've pressed it. So it has that kind of technique there. So thank you for listening to my curator's tour of our exhibition Rooted here at the Dovecote Centre. There's quite a long list of people to thank for making this possible. Principally the Northumberland Coast National Landscape, who we really appreciate being willing to put the funds behind a contemporary art project like this in the area. So thank you to the Northumberland Coast National Landscape. Thanks also to me and Jim behind the camera. We are co-directors of Dovecote Street Arts. We are working here at the Dovecote Centre in Amble alongside Northumberland Theatre Company, our partner organisation in the theatrical arts. We'd also like to say a big thank you to Amble Town Council. So Amble Town Council supported us with the Dovecote Street show last year that we did, but what they enabled us to do was to create an exhibition space like this. So they were willing to invest the town's money behind all these exhibition boards to create an accessible, friendly space for the public coming in to view contemporary art in a local setting like this. We'd also like to say thank you to Matthew Connolly. Matthew built these exhibition boards for us, and he put them together in such a way that we can flat pack them down and rebuild them really very easily. Thanks also to MKM Building Supplies at Alnwick, and Gordon was very generous in supplying us with some extra materials to build these exhibition boards. And as I mentioned, Ali Rowland was our writer in residence. Ali's done a great job of producing poems for all of the pieces on display here, and also to her husband Phil, who has produced some music for a promotional video that we'll also be using. So yeah, thank you for visiting our exhibition. Thanks also to Anna from Berwick and Catherine Renton, who were both part of our outreach programme, which was again supported by the Northumberland Coast National Landscape. We were able to provide some free workshops here at the Dovecote Centre during the Amble Puffin Festival. Catherine's also been able to go out and work with a couple of our local art groups at Warkworth and Acklington and engage them in some ideas about the environment and our coastline. So thank you. And if you have any questions, you can get in touch with us via our social media. Thank you.